Okay, so these notes are covering the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is using a quadratic in standard form so that, sorry, this is a new note-taking app, so I'm learning it. So ax squared plus bx plus c, that's standard form. So quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's where you're going to get this a, b, and c from. And then you're just plugging it into the formula and simplifying. If you are someone that learns by, if you learn by listening to music or learn equations and stuff to melodies, if you get on YouTube and just Google quadratic formula songs, there are a ton of different songs you can listen to help memorize the quadratic formula. So here we have a quadratic, g of x equals 5x squared minus 2x. There isn't a c here, so c you can say is plus 0. So I personally always write out what a, b, and c are. So a equals 5, b equals negative 2, and c equals 0. And then if you need to, write out what the quadratic formula is. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we're just going to plug this information in. So the opposite of negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 5 times 0 all over 2 times a is 5. So then simplify. So the opposite of negative 2 is a positive 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 5 times 0 is 0 all over 10. And 4 minus 0 is 4, so I have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 over 10. So the square root of 4 is 2, so this is now 2 plus or minus 2 over 10. And we're able to get two different answers from this. So the first one is 2 plus 2 over 10, which is 4 over 10, which is 2/5. And then our second answer is 2 minus 2 over 10, which is 0 over 10, which is 0. So I have two solutions. My two solutions are 0 and 2/5. Okay. My next example, I have g of x equals 2x squared minus 3. So let's identify a, b, and c. So a equals 2. B is actually 0. There isn't an x in the middle, so that's 0x. And then c is negative 3. So now I'm going to plug this information into the quadratic formula. So the opposite of 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3 all over 2 times a is 2. So the opposite of 0, I don't really need it, so I just have plus or minus the square root of 0 squared is 0, minus 4 times 2 times negative 3, that would be 24. And that would be a plus 24 because of the negatives, all over 4. So we have plus or minus the square root of 24 over 4. But we're not going to leave it like that because we can simplify our radical. So the square root of 24 can be broken up to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. So I have plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 6 over 4. Which the square root of 4 is 2, so I have plus or minus 2 radical 6 over 4. And then last step, anything outside of the radicals can be simplified. So here, 2 goes into 2 and 4, so the 2 is now a 1, 4 is now a 2. So we end up with plus or minus the square root of 6 over 2. So if you can, simplify a radical. And then if you're simplifying outside of your radical, everything on the outside has to be divisible by the same thing. Okay, next example. I have f of x equals negative x squared minus 5x minus 11. So identifying a, b, and c, I get a equals negative 1, b equals negative 5, c equals negative 11. So now plug it in. So let me do a different color. So the opposite of negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 11 all over 2 times negative 1. So the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25 minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 11 is going to be 44. So minus 44 all over negative 2. So then simplifying, I get 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 19 all over negative 2. And then we cannot have the square root of a negative number. So that's going to be an imaginary number. So remember, we break it up and say it's the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 19. So this is 5 plus or minus I radical 19 all over negative 2. And you can leave it like this. Or you can say that you can bring the negative up to the front and say that it's negative 5 plus or minus I radical 19 all over 2. Either one. But there is nothing else that we can do here. We can't simplify the square root of 19 because that's a prime number. And there is nothing that goes into 5, 1, and negative 2. So this is simplified. And my last example, I have f of x equals 2x squared minus 2x plus 3. So a is 2, b is negative 2, and c is 3. So I'm going to plug in my formula. Ooh, purple. Okay. So the opposite of negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3 all over 2 times 2. So the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 2 times 3 is 24 all over 2 times 2 is 4. So now 4 minus 24 is negative 20. So I have 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 20 all over 4. I can't leave my radical like that. So first off, the square root of negative 20 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 20. So that's 2 plus or minus I radical 20 over 4. And now I need to break up my radical even further. So the square root of 20 can be broken up as the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. So this is 2 plus or minus I radical 4 times radical 5 all over 4. There we go, 2I times the square root of 5 all over 4. And now our radical is simplified, but we can look at the whole numbers on the outside of the radical. So I have a 2, a 2, and a 4. And 2 goes into those 3. So these 2's, there will be a 1, 1, and this 4 becomes a 2. So we end up with 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 5 all over 2. And that is it for quadratic formula.